Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about how the world of work and our attitudes to work are changing. This show is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, a London-based company where we help teams and organizations transition to an office-optional approach. To have a look at what we do and the show notes to our podcast episodes, head over to virtualnotdistant.com. Thank you for spending your time with us. Hello and welcome to episode 212 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, which today is all about how remote work can be used to support socio-economic change. If this is the first time you're listening to the show, well, welcome. My name is Pilar. Great to meet you. And you are in for a meaty episode. In a way, we've touched before a lot on these aspects, but we've never had an episode which really looked at how remote work can go beyond helping us to work from where we work best, which is what we hear a lot. And actually, when you think about it, that is pretty amazing, because if you can have a happy workforce, you can have a happy society, healthy individuals, healthy society. But today's episode is looking at how remote work can be a tool for all sorts of other social change. For example, how it can help people connect with their local communities, how it can help gender balance in the workforce, how it can tackle youth unemployment, how it could provide refugees with a more dignified life, and how it can help us tackle some complex socioeconomic problems. So we're going wide today, and you'll be able to find detailed show notes and contact details for our guests and their pictures, and there's a lot of guests today. So if you go to our website, virtualnotdistant.com, look for episode 212 in the podcast page, and you will have there loads of stuff. I have one update only for you today because we have so much to cover. If you are a facilitator, or if you're involved in activities which include facilitating meetings or learning activities for groups, co-located or online, the IAF England and Wales chapter, and that is the International Association of Facilitators, the England and Wales chapter now have a podcast, and you might recognize one of the co-hosts. Me. So if that sounds something interesting, we are only on episode 3 at the moment. Check out Facilitation Stories. That's the name of the show, wherever you get your podcast. And we'll also put the link to the webpage in the show notes today. That's it. That's all the updates from me. Now, I'm going to go straight into the meat of this episode because we have a range of guests, some of whom, if you're a regular listener, Thanks for listening. You will have heard some of these guests before on the show. Their interest in remote as a tool to tackle social problems is varied, so are their ways of tackling them. So, who are these wonderful people that joined me for this episode? In order of appearance, you will hear from Chris Slemp, who's now a Customer Success Manager, Modern Workplace at Microsoft in the UK. Mandy Garner, who's the editor of workingmoms.co.uk. We'll hear from Nacho Rodriguez, who's the founder of Nomad City, the conference in Gran Canaria. I'll welcome for the first time on the show Lorraine Charles, who's based in the Middle East and is looking at how remote work can help refugee communities. And we'll end with Laurel Farr, who, among other things, advises international governments, educational institutions, etc., on how to use remote work to fuel socioeconomic progress. I'll introduce them properly as we hear from them, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of the diversity of what we're covering today. I'd like to start with a little bit of a personal take on the subject. And what I mean by this is that I'd first like to get out of my system the things that concern me around how remote work is being perceived and how this can affect us as members of society. So I thought it was pertinent to start this episode also with the first person that I started to have these kind of conversations with. So Chris Slemp has been on the show before, and we always credit him with the term office optional, which regular listeners and friends of Virtual Not Distant will have heard us use often. Now, Chris and I this time weren't able to record together, so I thought we'd role model some asynchronous communication, some audio asynchronous communication. So first of all, I asked him, I said, when I first met you, we talked about how remote work can help us build or be a part of our community wherever we want to build it, which might not be necessarily at work. Now, as more organizations adopt remote work, I'm hearing a lot of focus on still keeping the sense of community at work. But don't we have a chance to offer different options to employees instead of assuming that employees want to self-realize mainly at work? Chris, what are your thoughts?
So this idea of where we build community. So one of the fundamental questions that I have around this is it the company's obligation to actually provide it? The company has only really assumed that role since we started commuting to a job. And it has really become the source of much of the workplace sexual harassment, politics around perks, think the corner office or, the prime parking space. The truth is it changes with the age of your employees, right? So the WeWorks, for example, provide a lot of the stuff they do because there's no question they're catering to a certain demographic. If you're young and have no kids, then yeah, work is your community. I mean, not to stereotype, but they probably only sleep at home and even then not much, right? And then the more mature employees are kind of torn between two communities. They're left torn between, the people that they see at their son and daughter's soccer match, football match, and the community at work. So, guess which one wins most of the time, right? The one that's putting food on your table. So we do have options now with more remote work. And so I think it's time that employers dial it down a little bit. And for example, we've obviously talked about making your office presence optional, right? So whether or not you're in the office or have a desk should be optional. Some of the social events that they should host for those that need them should also feel optional. They feel so mandatory and they needn't, right? For somebody who doesn't really need that. And one of the ways to counterbalance that perhaps is to recognize on an equal footing the contributions that employees are making to communities of all kinds. So whether that's contributions that they're making to the office community or those that they're making to their local communities, what they're doing in their local schools or charities or whatnot, and kind of put those on equal footing. That might help to normalize, that community can be wherever you need it to be personally as appropriate with your age, perhaps, or just your family circumstances, whatever they might be.
Then I thought I'd follow up a conversation that we actually started the one time we had dinner together over in Edinburgh almost 2 years ago, and something that still worries me. Here's what I asked him. I feel that with statements such as remote work is the future, we are sidelining some jobs which cannot be done remotely, and also we're sidelining the non-knowledge worker jobs. And as we try to reduce inequality through remote work, are we in danger of widening the gap between knowledge workers and other types of work which cannot enjoy the freedom of location independence? What should we be looking out for or advocating for? What do you think, Chris?
I'm going to make the case that all jobs are location dependent, and this might sound like I'm being picky here, but it's to kind of counter the claim that we're making. And I know that we came up with this last time we talked, that maybe certain types of roles are being underserved by this focus on remote work and all the benefits that it can bring. But the more I thought about it, the more I think all jobs are location independent. So I, for example, have to be with my customers on site when I am running a workshop. So my job is location dependent for that day. The engineer who is fixing a pothole has to be on that street on that day to fix that pothole. The HR rep who needs to meet with somebody about a sensitive issue needs to do that face to face with that client. And that usually means in an office. So all jobs really are location dependent some or all of the time. And if that's the case across the board, then we should be using technology to enrich all of those job experiences, work experiences. The road warrior, or the consultant, should be the first-class citizen of that company, just like the folks at headquarters. And so should the road engineer who's fixing potholes for the council government should be on an equal footing in terms of the investment that we're making in technology to enrich their jobs. So the road warrior gets access to their files and to data analytics from their phone. The road engineer gets to post a photo of the repaired pothole that they just fixed to Twitter to close the loop with the citizen who reported that pothole, for example. Or they get the benefit of this AI-driven dispatch system so that they rarely have to come into the office. They just go straight to the first road that they need to work on rather than doing all that extra traveling around and therefore, again, saving time for their families or whatnot. So, of course, remote work is the future. I think it's just a part, though, of improving work overall using technology. And so everyone should be empowered to work more effectively wherever is best for them. Remote work's going to play a role. So will AI, so will IoT, so will a bunch of other acronyms. This buzzword, digital transformation, it's really about enhancing our work wherever and whatever that work is. So the direct answer to your question, we should look for or advocate for ways to enhance the quality, the efficiency, the connectivity of everyone's work, regardless of whether or not they're a knowledge worker. We just have to think maybe a little out of the box or, just not think with our knowledge worker hat on and really just ask them. If you ask them, they will tell you where they're having to do workarounds or what are their key pain points. And there's usually always some kind of a solution involving technology to enrich that job.
And finally, Chris, anything else on your mind regarding how the introduction of remote work in organizations can, will, or might affect society? And has your thinking around this changed over the past 5 years?
I think all of us have been thinking about politics and divisiveness lately. And I'm fascinated. The intersection with remote work is that I'm fascinated by some early data that's showing that remote workers are drifting into cheaper places to live. So Thailand is the classic example, right? The graphic designer or the coder who wants to go and live in an exotic place on their own. They go live like a king over in Thailand. Well, the problem is that worker gets a little bit older and wants to raise a family, and it's not exactly, it may be, but it may not be the place that they want to raise their family. So they want to come maybe back to their homeland of let's say it's the United States, but then they realize, oh, I can't affordably raise a child or family, multiple children in Silicon Valley. It's just too expensive. And so a lot of those Silicon Valley workers are now taking advantage of these remote working capabilities to move to the Midwest, say, or to raise their families because it's affordable. There's a side effect, though. So are we eventually going to have, as that disperses? So we had, for example, we've had the largest migration within the United States in the last couple of years has been from California to Texas. You couldn't get to states much further apart politically. Now they're mostly moving to Austin, which is much more close to California. But the point is, Texas is starting to feel politically much more balanced than it has historically. And so is that going to happen? Now take that to a global level, right? So will the melting pot that the United States used to be become more of a reality again? And this time around, will that be a positive thing? Because the way that we're working gives us more time to connect with our neighbors. That's the big picture stuff that I'm just really fascinated by and would like to spend more time on. I think remote work by itself, if it was truly embraced in the way that it should be, has the potential to really change the world in these kinds of ways. So always looking for more data on that. So if you have any more along those lines, I'd love to hear it.
Thank you so much, Chris. And listeners, you can hear Chris in episodes 202, 144, and 123. And I recommend, if you are on LinkedIn, that you follow him there, where he's very active. So if you want to connect with him, tell him you heard him on this show. Now, remote work is often part of the wider flexible working agenda, so I thought we'd go there. But first, even though often the two terms are used interchangeably, we really need to start looking at them separately. Flexible working can mean many different things: part-time, job sharing, compressed hours, sometimes working from home, or flexible schedules that are location independent. But remote doesn't always mean flexible. Just means that we're away from those we work with. And we can have flexible working that doesn't include working remotely or working from home. So if you are interested in this, I recommend episode 21 of my Pocket Psych, where main host Richard McKinnon and I looked at the different kinds of flexible working that is being offered in organizations. So that's episode 21 of my Pocket Psych. Now, with all of that in mind, I thought I'd speak to Mandy Garner, who's the managing editor of workingmoms.co.uk and also, and she tells us about this, workingwise.co.uk. That last one, that site, targets a demographic we don't usually talk about, but you'll have to listen to her to find out who that is. And she's been in the flexible working space for quite a while now, so she really understands what's going on there, especially in the UK. And even now, we're still hearing that flexible work, and especially working from home, is something that parents, of course, really welcome. And looking at how it has supported mothers in particular, especially where we're coming from, it could well be responsible for keeping women in the workforce. Now, there are still issues, and you'll hear from Mandy what those are. So a lot of the advocating for shifting the way we look at work patterns, which is also what remote work is about, that was done by parents and their champions. And Mandy also has experience of seeing how flexible work, incorporating some remote work, is being viewed in large traditional organizations. So let's move on to the conversation with Mandy Garner.
So Working Mums was started over 10 years ago, and the aim was basically to put employers who were able to offer flexible working or willing to offer flexible working, which wasn't so many in those days, together with the candidates who were looking for flexible working and for whom flexible working was really important in terms of being able to balance their work and family lives. So we've come a long way since then. So first of all, we advertised flexible new roles, and then we sort of developed editorial from there, and a big focus of ours is on best practice. So we have top employer awards that are kind of promoting best practice in all sorts of areas, but one of them is obviously innovation and in flexible working. And from those top employer awards, which are now in their celebrating their 10th anniversary in November, we've spun out some roundtables with employers, which have been really successful, really interesting, because you get employers who are quite progressive in terms of what they're offering, say in terms of family support or flexible working, and they had sort of teamed up with ones that are really keen to do more but aren't quite there yet. There's a really interesting sort of discussion, and we write up white papers on that and share them free on our website, so with other employers, so they can, get some ideas as well.
So almost like a mentoring relationship between employers.
That's right, absolutely. And a lot of what we do, for example, there's the sales team who are sort of working on job adverts. A lot of what they do is, education. I don't know if you call it education sort of process. It's sort of talking about why it's a good idea to to just put maybe a little bit of flexibility into the job advert, or or maybe more. How do they phrase it? How to get to that market of people that there's a lot of skills shortages at the moment in many sectors, and employers are really keen to tap into people with a lot of experience, and a lot of those people are parents and just want a little bit of flexibility. So it's a win-win for both the employers and the candidates.
The awards is their 10th year, but the company, was it your 10th anniversary this year or last year?
No, we've been going since 2006.
Okay, so even more. Ooh, wow, 2006. So how has the world of flexible working changed in that time? I mean, I don't know whether you've been with a company that long, and how has remote work been a part of that flexible working?
So in the early days, when the director of Working Mums set it up, she had to ring up and do her research and talk to a lot of employers. And it was quite hard work getting them to sort of even consider that whole kind of flexible working agenda. And that's definitely not the case now. There's much more research that's come out showing not only that people, candidates are really keen to have more flexible working, but also showing the benefits generally, the benefits to business of, more motivated people, more loyal, more less likely to have absences. That kind of research was not there when Working Mums first started. There's a really good sort of bed of research now that's showing the benefits, so it's easier to argue for it. Where there are still issues is that, flexible working is a very wide thing, and a lot of employers still see it as just part-time versus full-time. Particularly, there's problems with the larger SMEs. For startups, smaller companies, they can be kind of more nimble and agile, and actually flexible working really helps, and they can, say, employ somebody on a part-time basis who will then grow with the business, or there's much more room and scope for flexibility. When the company gets a little bit bigger, then they start having to have policies, and they start having to write it all down, and then it sometimes can get quite inflexible. So the flexibility that you had because you knew everybody in the company, everything was kind of geared around the individual, and it was easier to make that work. In a smaller company, it becomes slightly more complicated as the company gets bigger, and there can be a sort of tendency to kind of become more inflexible. Whereas the larger companies have more resources to play with. Often the SMEs don't have, the HR resources and all that kind of thing to do the best practice and, look at all the different issues. So that's where there's a lot of work going on at the moment. And a lot of the focus now, whereas in the past it was all about, people wanting flexible working, now there's a focus on what happens once you are a flexible worker. So about career progression. Career progression is a really big issue now. So certainly in our annual surveys, there's a lot of concern around people getting stuck in, a certain role because they work flexibly and not being able to move on, potentially not getting access to the kind of training and development that they might need to sort of move on, feeling a bit sidelined. So our annual survey this year, it shows 80% of people who were working flexibly felt that they were either very stuck or somewhat stuck in their career. And I think it was something like 57% said that their career had not progressed at all since having children. So that's where there's a lot of work going on. And also still around this whole idea of advertising flexible new roles. Companies may have flexible working policies, they may have even a flexible culture to a certain degree, but there's still a problem when it comes to actually advertising flexibility within a role. So the default still tends to be the kind of full-time norm. And some employers are doing really interesting and progressive work there. And there was some attempts to put legislation on the books about this to get companies to advertise all roles as far as possible as potentially being able to be worked flexibly.
Why you're saying that it's difficult to advertise these flexible roles? Why is that? Is that because it needs more explanation? Is that because they're scared that they're not going to be as flexible as advertised? Or on the flip side, what are those great things that you're seeing some employers do?
A lot of it is just, as I said, the default is we've had somebody doing that role full time up to now. We just can't envisage it being done any other way. So the companies or the employers that we've seen that are doing really interesting stuff is where they actually are challenging that. So it takes the HR people to sort of go. So, for example, Lloyds Bank, they have an agile hiring program, and every role that comes through HR, every new role that a line manager might say, oh, I need so-and-so to fill in this role. If there's no flexibility in the advert or no scope for flexibility, then the HR person will have conversations with that line manager, and they'll kind of try to scope out what kind of flexibility there might be. If they sort of stood back and maybe looked at it in a different way, the job doesn't have to be done the way it's always been done. It's worth challenging and opening your mind a bit, and you might get different types of candidates. You might widen the talent pool and get interesting new perspectives on things.
And so from your point of view, from the point of view of working mums, it was mainly mothers that you were looking at advocating for making sure that as professionals, they had access to the same jobs, I imagine. Now we're seeing that maybe the career progression is stalled, so that might be the next step. How do you see flexible working? Let's talk about it broadly. Having enabled mothers to stay within the workforce.
It's not just mothers as well. I mean, we just started earlier this year working dads. There's a big growing appetite from dads as well to be working more flexibly. But to answer your question, there's certainly many more mothers who are in the workforce. I think there was a report out this week by the Office for National Statistics that was showing the number of mums who are still in the workforce. When I started working, when I had my first child, which is a long time ago now, 19 years ago, it was really, really unusual to be working to a certain degree. It was unusual to be working when your children were very young. So a lot of people took career breaks. It was certainly very unusual to be working full time, which is what I was doing. And now things have changed, quite rapidly when you think about it. The stay-at-home mums are now in the minority, and most mums are working, and many of them increasing numbers of them are working full time. And a lot of that, I think, is to do with the availability of flexible working, because it enables people to work maybe full time, but then have, a day or 2 days working from home, or, flexi hours, or whatever the kind of flexibility it might be. But I think that's made a huge difference in keeping women in the workforce.
So we've got mums, we've got dads, but there's another sector that you are now looking at supporting with this new site, Working Wise. What is that about, Mandy?
So this is a website for over 50s, and it's really a natural extension of what we've been doing up to now, also because we've all got a bit older.
I was going to say over 50s. For me, that's only a couple of years' time.
So definitely. So what we're really interested in is the whole, and this is going to be a focus of our Top Employer Awards in next month, is the whole life cycle, the work life cycle. There are various pinch points for people within the whole life cycle of working. There are various different reasons why people might want flexible working when they're younger as well. They might be doing studies, they might be doing volunteering work, there might be all sorts of things that they're doing. Then, of course, the parents and the work-life balance stuff. And as you move sort of through working life cycle, you might also have caring responsibilities for parents or partners. And also, as we're working longer, as the retirement age is getting further and further away, there's more of a demand for people to work more flexibly, maybe reduce their hours as they come towards retirement. And so we thought that it's a natural sort of progression to get into the space of older workers and look at some of the issues, not just around flexible working, but also self-employment, age discrimination, menopause policies, all of those kind of things, caring. Quite a few employers now have carer policies. All those things we want to sort of highlight and sort of highlight the best practice and encourage others to get on board.
This is really good from our remote work bubble that a lot of us are in. It's really good to hear that really looking into the future, because this is, of course, something that is going to happen as we have these better lifestyles that we want. We're also going to be living longer, we hope, at least as a population. I'm so glad that you're doing this, looking at all these things that we need to look out for and also supporting us. How does remote work specifically, so that location independent, that not having to be for knowledge workers with in headquarters, how are you finding that is integrated or not? Is it something that's a feature that people want, that people give?
Definitely. I mean, our annual surveys show home working is really popular. It's really popular, but it's quite rare. It's rarer than, it may be that the people who are answering our annual survey, they're obviously looking for greater flexibility, but the figures are around about 11% people working, doing some form of remote working. That includes people who are working in office and then having like 2 days, 1 day working remotely. But also, I mean, I'm saying that about our survey, but there's other surveys that have come out. There was one recently about public sector workers that showed that only 3% of public sector workers worked mainly remotely or mainly from home. And also there was another survey. There's hundreds of surveys.
There are lots.
Nowadays, there's like every day there's loads of stuff about flexible working and parents and everything, and so you can't move for it, which is good, which is a good thing. But there was a survey from City Parents which also was saying that parents felt that they wanted to work from home more, but they felt that their line managers were not trusting them to do so. So there's definitely a big demand for it, and you can perfectly understand as a parent. I mean, Working Mums is a virtual company, so everybody at Working Mums works remotely, and that's what we've done for years and years and years, and it works really, really well. We certainly managed to build the company and grow the company and everything, and not had any problems with that. And it enables us to cover a much wider geographical area, I think, because we have people based in various different parts of the country. So it's really good business wise.
What trends do you think? What does it look like is going to happen in the flexible work arena in the UK from what you're seeing, or even in the remote work arena? Where do you think we're heading?
Well, I think that, logic tells you that this has got to, can only continue this way, and that flexible working has to become normalized within the workforce. So the demands that people have now, we have in most families both people are working. There are so many different demands, and the caring responsibilities, elder care, all that kind of stuff, as well as children. It doesn't really work unless there is flexibility. Otherwise, people are so overstretched that they are completely at risk of burnout. I mean, burnout is a huge thing anyway. Just a little bit of flexibility can go such a long way. It can make all the difference. I just remember a friend of mine who, they used to have the morning meeting at 9 o'clock, and she could never make that because she had to drop off at the school in the bus. She couldn't get there. And if they had it at 9:05, it didn't make any sense to them to have it at 9:05. But every day she came and she felt stressed, and she felt that they felt she was not doing her job properly. It's completely demoralizing. It doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, what a terrible story to end on.
Yeah, but I think that that it has to change. It has to evolve, because you can't have an employment situation, a work situation where it doesn't actually fit the demands of the workforce.
And you can hear more from Mandy in episode 74. And if you would like to get in touch with her email address is mandy.garner@workingmoms.co.uk. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Nacho Rodriguez, who's the founder of the conference Nomad City. And he was on Skype from Gran Canaria, and he's been running that conference for 4 years. And it's happening on the week we're releasing this episode. The Canary Islands in Spain have been working hard to attract remote workers to the region for a number of reasons. They started attracting digital nomads, and now they're branching out to remote employees. And this number of reasons Nacho will explain. But Nomad City has 2 aims. It's to expose the Canary... Well, it has more aims, but this is how I see it. It has 2 aims, which are to expose the Canary Islands to remote workers and to expose local people, especially young people, to remote work and distributed companies, remote companies. So we'll get to that early in the conversation. But first, to understand Nacho's context, I asked him why they started Nomad City.
We started this event 4 years ago as an excuse to promote the destination, Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, and in particular the Canary Islands, for remote workers. As you know, the Canary Islands have been known for decades as a tourism destination, but for about 5-6 years, it's become more and more a hub for remote workers and digital nomads. And I personally got in touch with this movement 5 years ago when we opened our co-working space here in Las Palmas. And we start receiving a lot of remote workers, digital nomads that wanted to work from our space. And for me, it was a great discovery and sort of like the part that I was missing in my hometown. I was born and raised in Las Palmas, but I had the possibility to travel and study abroad and also work abroad for many years. Until the point where I decided to come back to my hometown. And this connection to an international community of workers with very interesting backgrounds and projects was the piece that I was missing. And for us, it was an opportunity. And we decided to find a way to speed up this process. And that's how actually the conference started 4 years ago.
And before we go as to how it's evolved, because I think that's also very interesting, you were saying about the Canary Islands promoting themselves as a destination for remote workers. Tell us a bit about that.
Basically, we see a lot of value in remote work for our community. And there's different approaches to this. Obviously, we started learning first only about digital nomads. So digital nomads defined as those remote workers who travel intensively. And for us, it was already a very valuable tourist in a way, because digital nomads normally get involved in the local community. They spend their time and their money in town in a very sustainable way compared to what traditional tourism offers, right? Which is normally big hotels, chains, tour operators, and actually the money and the value doesn't stay in the local community. It normally goes somewhere else, right? So that was the first value that we saw. But also, as we start learning more and more about the movement, we saw that also they brought knowledge, they brought opportunities, and this was very valuable to our community as some of the problems we have locally, it's unemployment. The unemployment rate under 25, it's huge in the Canaries. It's almost 50%. So for us, it was also an opportunity to teach and to connect them to the locals, for them to understand the possibilities that they had to also work remotely from the Canary Islands. So, it's been approached in several ways.
And so how is the conference contributing, complementing, contrasting this?
Okay, well, the conference has evolved a lot over the last 4 years, obviously because we have also learned a lot over the last 4 years. We started this conference, and that's where the branding comes from, as a conference focused on digital nomads, right? And that's how we came across Las Palmas de Gran Canaria being the nomad city, right? And the content around Nomad City number one was very focused on digital nomadism. So being able to travel and work remotely or make this travel sustainable in the long term because you had some sort of income, right? But as we moved along, we learned what was happening also in the corporate world and how this was very beneficial also for companies, right? And we started switching the content and making the umbrella of the content much larger. So digital nomadism is only a very small part of the conference that we have today, but we talk about many other aspects of remote work.
Good. So give us a little bit of a flavor then.
For this year, the event has 4 parts. The first part, which is an unofficial event that we are finishing to set up, it's a roundtable around the topic of economic development. We are going to have a couple of really experienced remote work advocates around the topic of economic development. And basically, we have prepared a roundtable with executives and also government officials of the Canary Islands to first learn what they are doing and what experiences they have from other locations around the world, and then debate and discuss how can we improve our strategy in the Canary Islands to get the most out of remote work, right? So that's going to be the very first event that's going to be happening on November 6th. On November 7th, we start the workshops. Workshops are 1 hour long sessions where the mentors get deep into different topics And for the workshops, we have prepared actually 2 different tracks. One of the tracks is more focused on freelance work. So those who are freelancing and want to do it remotely. And another track more focused on teams and companies. And on Thursday, November 7th, we have in total, I think it's 8 different workshops on each track. So for a total of 16. Then we move on to November 8th, which is the main conference day, only 1 track. And here we cover topics of just such as the state of remote work in 2019, what's onboarding like for a company like Automatic. We have a lot of discussion panels. One of them is challenges and advantages of growing the remote business. We're also talking about the future of the gig economy. We are talking about obviously remote communication and collaboration, which is a very important aspect. We have Matthew from Basecamp pitching about, what is it like to work for Basecamp. So it's very diverse. And we finished the event this year with a very special event that we have called the Summit. The Summit, it's an invitation-only event. It's actually an unconference because the content is prepared on the spot. It's limited to a group of 60 remote work advocates. And during the summit, we are going to have discussions at a much higher level. So we're talking about a group of 60 remote work advocates that have at least 2 or 3 years of experience, either leading, consulting, or working around this topic. So we can actually speed up the knowledge, share experiences, and come out of the conference with a lot of value, right?
You're also being a broker between people who are looking for remote work, some locals also. You're being the broker between them and some of the companies also during the event?
Correct. This is something that we beta tested last year and last edition, and it actually worked out really well. We had a couple of success stories. Basically, what we've done is prepare what we call a remote job fair. And it's a very simple. Basically, we've prepared with a specialist on human resources a survey. So basically, we ask any participants, all the information about the curriculum, the knowledge, the skills, what they are, what kind of job or position they're looking for, et cetera, et cetera. We build a database with all the people who are willing to look for a remote job. And since we have a broad spectrum of companies participating in the conference that they are remote friendly, we basically give them a filtered selection of those candidates in order to try to match them with the positions that they have available. That was very successful last year. We have a couple of success stories. It's also for us very useful to comply with one of our motivations, which is find opportunities to locals that are looking for a remote job. But it's not limited to locals, obviously. It's for everyone who is participating in any way in the conference who is looking for a remote opportunity.
And you can find out more about Nacho by connecting with him on LinkedIn. And you can hear more about the conference in a bonus episode 210. Now, for another new guest to the podcast, I am really happy to introduce you to Lorraine Charles, who is based in the Middle East, and she's looking at the livelihood opportunities for refugees in Jordan and Turkey. And she's the first person that I heard using remote work in this particular context, so I am delighted to share her work with you. She's in the early stages of this work, but it's starting to paint a picture of the future and some of the stuff that can be done to, well, let's face it, to make this world a better place. And since we spoke, Lorraine has developed a pilot program, so I'll tell you about it after my conversation with her. So here you go, listeners. I hope you find this fascinating. So listeners, I am delighted to introduce you to Lorraine Charles. And actually, I would like to hear from her what her connection with remote work is, because I think, well, she's going to be able to explain it a lot better than myself. So Lorraine, What is your connection with remote work and what's your interest in it?
I've been working remotely myself for the last 4 years, but I've also been working on issues around refugees since 2011. And initially, my research around refugees was on gender and education. And then I sort of began to realize that livelihoods is a big, is a big issue because there's a lot of focus on education, but not much on what happens post-education. So if refugees are being given education opportunities, but nothing post-education. So I did a big research project on livelihood opportunities for refugees in Jordan and Turkey. And what I realized, whilst there was some political will, to integrate refugees into the labor force, there just weren't enough jobs. So this is why I sort of thought about the way I worked and thought, well, this is actually an opportunity for refugees. And around that time, 2016, President Obama's conference engaging the private sector was quite prominent at UNGA. And all the private sector companies were talking about engaging refugees somehow. And I sort of put the link together. I work remotely. Refugees need jobs. The private sector globally are willing to engage in refugees. Why can't we think of an ecosystem where refugees can work remotely using the private sector globally to provide these jobs? So that's kind of how I came about the idea of, of remote work for refugees being a viable option in terms of employment opportunities, because there's just not enough jobs for refugees where they are located. It's a win-win solution for everyone.
And I wish that more people who are policymakers and who are looking at employment, at refugee status, etc., in countries had actually made that link. I'm thinking, well, maybe we should make more people, more decision makers work remotely so that, like you, they understand, hang on, what this gives me is this. Couldn't this give another type of population the same opportunities?
Exactly. And technology is changing the way we live, the way we work. Technology is so powerful. It can really make a difference in the lives of people. And it has in other spheres. In education, technology and education is something that's been quite progressive in the last sort of 10, 15 years. But the link hasn't been so much mirrored with employment.
You've got a really interesting paper, Lorraine, called An Examination of Remote Work for Refugees, and we'll stick the link in the show notes so that listeners can read it at ease. When you're thinking of finding remote work opportunities for refugees, are you thinking about any locations in particular? What's your experience? Where have you been looking and where have you been investigating what the state is?
Okay, so I've mostly been looking at the Middle East. I mean, I'm based in the Middle East. My research is on the Middle East, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey, particularly around the Syrian refugee population. So that's where I've been looking.
What would enabling refugees to work remotely mean? What would it give them?
Well, in these three countries, they have protectionist labor market laws, which don't allow refugees full access to the labor market. And because there aren't enough jobs in the local population, for even the local population, putting the extra layer of refugees competing for the same jobs as the local population for governments, then they need to be seen as doing something, for their population as opposed to refugees. So this is why the idea of the global private sector providing opportunities for refugees where they're located, but not only refugees, but also the local population. Can the global private sector not mobilize to provide jobs for individuals where they are located? And as the narrative is changing from a humanitarian perspective to more development perspective, the whole idea of refugee resilience is quite high on the political agenda. And what provides resilience? Well, livelihoods is a big part of resilience, not jobs where they're working formally, where they're working precarious working conditions, where they can be, where they're vulnerable to exploitation. So at least working remotely, they have more control of their lives. So that's what it provides refugees. But also, I don't want to exclude the host community because obviously can't absorb the number of people that need jobs. So the solution isn't just for refugees, but also for individuals in the host community.
Yeah, because that's one of the problems, isn't it? When a country starts to welcome refugees, is that I imagine unemployment maybe rises because, of course, there's just more people around and maybe not more jobs.
And also, I mean, having refugees, it can stimulate the economy, but not to the extent to provide everyone with jobs. And also, most the countries that refugees tend to be in are developing countries, which don't have jobs even for their local populations before the arrival of refugees. So it just adds an extra layer of burden on the host community. Obviously, in places like Europe can better absorb individuals coming in because the economies are larger and the economies are more vibrant. In developing countries, particularly Jordan and Lebanon, they were struggling economically prior to the arrival of refugees. So it just makes it much, much more burdensome on the host economies.
So when you're saying for refugees to have access to remote work, or that they start working remotely, would they be working for employers outside of those host countries?
That's pretty much the idea, because the host countries don't have the jobs for everyone. So the idea is to mobilize the private sector globally, because there seems to be a lot of political will from the private sector to support refugees. And whilst this has never been, made explicit what this support means, the main role of the private sector is for jobs. So it sort of makes sense the private sector help provide jobs for refugees, not just in the countries where they're located, but also globally. And obviously, with the trend of a lot of companies already having remote workers anyway, and not only that, they have quite robust diversity and inclusion policies, and obviously hiring people in a different part of the world, it can open up the markets to these companies. So it just makes sense that this is something that can be looked at. I mean, I'm not saying it's without challenges, but it's something that can be explored, because the political narrative is for refugees to stay close to their home. People leave because they don't have economic opportunities. They can't pay for their children to go to school. They can't pay for healthcare. So if we provide jobs for refugees where they are, there's less of a will for them to leave.
What are the main challenges at the moment?
For refugees, the challenges for regular remote workers like you or I are exactly the same. Isolation, communication. But we have the additional challenges of working in an infrastructure which may not easily support the technology for remote work. Most refugees live in the urban community as opposed to camps, but still they may not even have the hardware and the computers for them to work remotely. Another thing is skills training. So whilst many might have the technical skills to work remotely, we all know that having the technical skills is only 50% of the way. You have to have the soft skills. It's not easy being a remote worker. You have to really have the mindset. And this is something which is not very easy, particularly for refugees from the context in which I look at, where they come from a very traditional education background. And the whole idea of autonomy in terms of education isn't something which is very present. So working remotely, again, adds an extra layer. For me, skills training is very, very important. The actual skills to be a remote worker, cross-cultural communication, working across time zones. How do you organize yourself? These are skills which we all need.
Because something also that struck me, and I think I was reading in the paper, was the fact that some refugees might not have even been on the internet or be that familiar with working around through technology, because the space has sped up so much in the last few years.
There are lots of organizations which are teaching refugees the technical skills where they can be remote workers or sort of regular full-time employees, teaching them coding, software development. Why can't we add an extra layer to this? Teach them how to then access the remote work economy after having these technical skills. So the people I'm talking about are people who would have the technical skills already.
Something I hadn't thought of also was, of course, the difficulty with payment.
Yes.
How is this being looked at?
Most refugees are unbanked. In fact, not just refugees, there are a lot of people in the world who are unbanked. And there are a couple of payment schemes which people use. So a few of the NGOs that I've spoken to are coming up with their own mobile payment system. So mobile payments are much more advanced in developing countries than they seem to be in sort of Europe and America. So this is one way that a lot of organizations are overcoming the sort of payment issues. And a couple in particular that I know are linked to local vendors. So they can, pay with a mobile phone. And if they need to get money, the relationship the company has with the vendor allows them to withdraw money. A few of them, one of the other organizations that I've spoken to, they sort of set up a consultancy which they get the international clients, and then the refugees work remotely for them, so that they can pay in cash. A couple of organizations were sort of acted as the middleman, where they got the contracts from the private sector, and then they paid the refugees themselves. So they acted as a sort of agent in between. You use PayPal or Western Union, but those have really high costs, and the conversion rates aren't always good. And a lot of the times, the amounts which can be transferred sometimes are small amounts, and sometimes it's not worth the money by using these PayPal or Western Union.
So I think I'm going to ask you about the new work you're doing in Edinburgh. If you can tell us a little bit about that. How is that an evolution of what you've done before, or is it separate? How is that connected?
So obviously, when I first started working on digital remote work for refugees, I sort of felt alone. There was no one that I knew that was working on the same topic. I was introduced to this academic from Edinburgh University who also had a research grant to work on digital livelihoods. So they're actually conducting research around the viability of this. It's sort of an extension of the work I've been doing, but sort of with a much larger scope because they actually have a grant. So we'll be looking at different aspects of remote work for refugees, looking at different places that refugees will consider, trying to come up with some robust policy recommendations for how this can be moved forward, but also looking at the ecosystem. So when I did my research, I discovered a few more organizations that were doing this, but they were all sort of NGO based, your labor force. So we actually want to actively engage with the private sector to make them aware that this is a potential talent pool which they probably have overlooked, who already hire people remotely, to try to engage them more. We want to say to them, hey, you guys are remote distributed companies anyway. Why not consider hiring refugees? Another big part of it is there's also a lot of work around impact investment. So a lot of companies who perhaps want to hire refugees may not have the entire ecosystem in place to facilitate, for hiring refugees. So there are a couple of organizations that actually want to invest in these companies to help support them so they can hire refugees. The work of the companies which will be invested in isn't solely to hire refugees, but we're hoping with the incentive of further investment, they would then hire refugees. And that's kind of what these impact investment funds are looking at. What companies are there who can hire refugees? How can we invest in them?
Yeah, because you need that investment, you need those resources, because it's not something that a business can do overnight, or that they're even going to know how to do it.
Exactly, yeah. So hopefully with the incentive of investment to grow their business anyway, they'd be more willing to go down this path. And really, it's no different from hiring someone in your own country. These individuals have had the unfortunate circumstance of being displaced. They aren't any less educated. It's just a circumstance which they had no control over.
Is there anything else that I haven't asked you that is not in the report also that you wanted to share?
I'm hoping that a lot of your listeners are companies which are distributed or partly distributed anyway. And I just want to share the message that we need to think about creating a new narrative for employment, not just for refugees, but for everyone. People with disabilities. It supports women who can't necessarily work from home. It supports people working and living in rural communities. Remote work is a way to stop, mega cities growing even larger, for people migrating to cities for work. So we need to start thinking about how we can change the narrative for employment. And this obviously will impact refugees, but why don't we utilize it to make lives better for everyone? This isn't just for refugees, it's for everyone who can't necessarily go to a particular city or a particular location to work. I can spend time with my children. Remote work has really enriched my life. Think about what it can do for people who actually are vulnerable, so they can have a greater control over their lives. They can pay for their children to go to school. They can feel empowered again. And for me, that's the beauty. That's the important thing about remote work.
Now, since I spoke with Lorraine a few months ago, she has an update. So her program, NAMAL, will provide soft skills training for refugees in the Middle East, specifically to be remote workers. And it will link them to dignified remote employment, as well as linking them to the global community of remote workers. So she's got a learning partner, Workplaceless. Many of you, I'm sure, especially if you're on Twitter, will have heard of them. And they have been providing certified learning programs to help individuals and companies transition to remote work. So what Lorraine is doing, she's working with Workplaceless and her collaborators to adapt the program to the refugee context. And this will include online facilitation, mentorships, other stuff. And NAMAL will then support the participants to find remote employment with private sector partners, beginning with a paid internship. as you heard Lorraine say, while many refugees might have the technical skills to work remotely, many lack the soft skills and just the know-how to navigate the remote work ecosystem. Anyone in this space who is helping others transition to it, or if you've transitioned yourself, you know that it's not just about the tech. We need to just shift how we're working. We need to adapt to specific ecosystems. We need to find our way within the teams or the people we're working with. So there's a lot we need to think of. So this is part of what Lorraine is doing. And she also says there has been no hiring of refugees as remote workers to significant numbers to date, so she wants to change that. So now here's the ask. So Lorraine and her collaborators would like to run a pilot to show proof of concept, so that the training in soft skills for remote work can lead to refugees being employed remotely. And then she wants to apply for larger funding after the pilot. They need $10,000 to pay for the remote work learning curriculum, including adapting it to the refugee context. And there will also be some to pay for the flights of Lorraine and her co-founder to the implementing locations, which are Erbil and Istanbul. So Lorraine is looking for companies to help them reach the initial funding target for the pilot. So that's one. The other, she's looking for companies to become private sector partners and commit to hiring the refugee remote workers. So if you're interested or have contacts who might be interested, you can connect with Lorraine on LinkedIn, or you can email her. You can use the email Lorraine, L-O-R-R-I, sorry, I'll do that again, L-O-R-R-I, AINE at NAAMAL, that's NAAMAL.org, and do check out the show notes to links for her current work on the show notes for episode 212 on virtualnotdistant.com. If you need me to repeat any of that, if that's not clear, just message me through our platform. So, and I'm going to be completely honest about this. I get very nervous at the thought of I wouldn't know where to start. There is so much stuff that I think I am not ready, for example. If I were given the opportunity to say, okay, do you want to tap into this pool? I really think I would need a lot of support. And this is something that Lorraine and I talked about also. We had problems with the internet connection, so I don't think it came up as well in the conversation. But there's a lot of support that companies need. Actually, we did talk about it. There's a lot of support that companies need. And for me, as a business owner, it's not just economic, it's also emotional, it's psychological. It is working with people in very, very different circumstances to what I'm used to. So just something to put out there. But if you know anyone who might be interested in the work in any way, then do get in touch with Lorraine. Well, I hope your brain is about to explode, just like mine has for the past days when I've been putting this episode together. But I've got a few more things for you to explore with our final guest. Now, Laurel Farrell is the CEO of Distributed Consulting, and she's the founder of the Remote Work Association. And if you've been in this space long enough, you will have come across her work. She has seen how remote work is being used to stimulate the local community and to redistribute the population, and also the effects that it's having on the environment and even politics.
Yes, I'm so glad we're having this conversation because so much of the media attention around remote work is all about its convenience. You can work in your sweatpants and you don't have to, sit in your car for an hour and things like that, which is great. However, I think that the real power and value of remote work is not about logistical planning of our lives or even saved real estate costs. I think it's the ripple effects when those changes are made. Remote work has this incredible, unprecedented power to influence the socioeconomics of our world in just about every way that we can conceive. Workforce equality, environmental sustainability, economic development. The list just goes on and on and on. So I'm really excited that you and I are having this conversation and drawing more attention to these benefits of remote work as opposed to the ones that we can all just think of off the top of our head.
Is there anything that is front of mind for you at the moment? Anything that you are paying particular attention to, or anything that you have been talking to other people recently about?
Yeah, a lot of my government projects that I work on as a consultant are primarily focused on economic development because remote work has this unique and special way of essentially reversing the traditional economic development cycle. Instead of bringing businesses in and then businesses bring employees, we can just skip that and go directly to the employee stage and recruit people to come directly to our city and bring their jobs with them. And that is extremely low cost and it's extremely fast, which is not the case in traditional economic development. And because of that, it is really revolutionary and it's extremely beneficial for quickly declining economies, such as the Midwest region of the United States. The World Economic Forum is using this for Africa, et cetera, et cetera. Like really isolated regions or economies that are recovering from political or economic turmoil. This can be a really great solution for them. So economic development is where I spend the majority of my time, just because we're engaged in it. It's already up and running as a solution, but there are so many others that we are starting to leverage as well. So they're all equally as exciting.
How does it work, Laurel? How do you start to facilitate the introduction or the sustainability of remote work in areas which are needing people to be there for all the reasons you're mentioning?
Yeah, so the first step is that we actually go into the community with one or two local advocates. It's important that a community hear about the introduction of remote work from somebody that they already know and trust, so that it doesn't ever seem like, some techie or modern businesses are coming in and going to threaten or capitalize on the community. They need to understand from somebody that they trust that we're coming in with a solution. We're here to help. So we start with that introduction, and then we introduce what the benefits of remote work are and what the realities of remote work are. And we help build the infrastructure of connectivity that is needed, and just introduce what are the possibilities with this as an option. We don't want them to think that we are a scam, or that we are only telling them that we're going to employ the entire city in entry level or offshore jobs. We want to make sure that they understand that this is a real economic ecosystem, that we have access to different industries and high levels of jobs, and we can stimulate education as well. Like there's a lot of different components to this, and then that's how we plant the seeds for building and nurturing a long-term sustainable ecosystem of remote work in a specific region.
Where do governments, or when do governments, or maybe this specific instance, realize that this is an option or start to explore it? Is it a question of, I don't know, do you know? How do they start thinking about it?
It's really fascinating because each government it comes from a different place. Like I said earlier, remote work is a very broad solution for a myriad of problems in socioeconomics. And so depending on the pain point that the local region experiences the most, that's traditionally how they start thinking about remote work as a solution. So some governments start thinking about this because they have a big pain point in transportation and mobility. They have traffic congestion, or another has really bad air quality. And so they're thinking about it through environmental sustainability, or another has very large geographic boundaries. And so they have a lot of isolated regions, and they are really dealing with the urban-rural divide and the depopulation of rural communities, or whatever. Like each community kind of comes at it from a different angle, but we all end up in the same spot because, again, remote work does have such a variety of solutions for so many different problems.
I've got a question then that I had planned, and
Yes.
it comes from this article that you wrote actually a few years ago now, more than 2 years ago now. Could remote work be economic development's new secret weapon? And it's really interesting that, like with a lot of this stuff, 2 years later, we're still obviously talking about it, but it's really coming to the forefront. And listeners, do have a read. She lists how many are there? There's 15 of ways, and I think they're really interesting just to get us thinking. And I bet that at least we haven't thought of 3 or 4 when we first come across the list. Mm-hmm. So just following a little bit on what we were saying, you have something that I hadn't thought of, where you said remote work supports city parks and recreation development. What did you mean by that?
Isn't that interesting? So this is a phenomenon that I think we're going to be hearing a lot about in coming years. I think in about 5 years, this is going to be a very hot topic as remote work becomes more and more common for our society and for our workplaces, is that when you work remotely, and especially the more remote you are, if you're remote full time, you don't have to live anywhere. All of our mentality of choosing where to live is based currently on, well, what's the commute like to the office, right? Like public transportation, what's your commute like? What are the schools and neighborhoods like? And based on what kind of industries are in that area. Like it really affects so much of urban planning. However, when we're remote workers, all of a sudden we can live anywhere. We can live absolutely anywhere we want, and it's a little bit overwhelming, to be honest. And so, what we see is we've been studying these remote workers, and when they have this level of freedom in choosing where they're going to live, we see that the number one factor and criteria of them selecting where they want to live is the natural landscape. They want the weather that matches their personality the best. They want access to more outdoors activities, and because that is something that they can really balance their work life with. Work-life balance is such a benefit of remote work, and balancing the work phase with the recreation phase is the number one preference, which is really exciting to think about. So yeah, we see areas that have, it doesn't matter, like if they're beaches or mountains or plains, each different landscape and climate has their own recreation style to offer. And when cities can capitalize on that, they can really draw a very specific and very excited crowd of remote workers to their area.
I hadn't thought of that. I haven't heard being put like that, choosing the weather to suit the personality. And I think it's often missed. I mean, we do see, of course, the classical cliche of everyone going to Thailand. But as you say, it could be that actually we prefer the mountains in Canada because we like the cold or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's interesting as well, that connection with nature, that how it might enable us, like this is another instance of technology actually enabling us to go back to connect with nature, should we wish.
Exactly. And on the municipal side, the cities, this is traditionally how they recruit a business to build in their city, is they develop a very strong infrastructure of parks and recreation and good shopping, and make the city a nice place to live so that the business will want to build there and therefore bring their employees to work and live there. And so again, when we reverse this economic development cycle, what happens is that we bring the workers first. They start generating a tax base in the city just automatically with no recruiting needed. They live there. They start bringing their spending power and their taxes to that city. And that allows the city to build up their budget first before going into debt to build this infrastructure. So previously they had to build the infrastructure before the business got there. So they would have to go into debt in order to start generating revenue. However, this reverses it, and it allows us to essentially bootstrap the building of our cities. So we can just get a little bit of seed money from the workers, from the remote workers that were free to recruit, then use that tax revenue to plug back into our parks and recreation or other parts of the city infrastructure, and then therefore it just grows from there, and it's much easier and much more affordable to start recruiting other businesses.
Is there a recent example? I heard the other day, I was talking to someone and they said there was somewhere in the US where they'd flipped it on its head. Instead of making it easy or even paying businesses to come and start their business in the city, they were paying people to go and work there.
Currently in the United States, there are several different initiatives and programs that are taking different approaches to using and leveraging remote work as an economic development solution. So there are the ones that you're talking about, both the states of Vermont and Tulsa Remote in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They both have an incentive program in which they are recruiting people from all over the world and paying them $10,000 to come live in their city, and they provide them with co-working and co-living resources and just plug them right into their community. It's absolutely fascinating. But there's also other initiatives like the Center on Rural Innovation that is a hub of co-working and co-living and entrepreneurship that is happening in a few different places in the United States. There's also the Rural Online Initiative that is happening in the state of Utah that is providing free remote work education to help people qualify to get remote jobs. And then there's also tax incentives from the state of Massachusetts and the state of Utah that are incentivizing businesses to offer remote jobs. So yes, a lot of different governments are seeing this as a solution.
And you've also been recently, I've seen your stuff on LinkedIn, you've recently been looking, and correct me if I'm wrong, about the impact of remote work on the environment and on shifting that. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What have you been looking at?
Yes. Well, again, this is another wonderful conversation that I've been having with governments, is this conversation about environmental sustainability as well as transportation and mobility. Like, these are big pain points for governments, whether they be city governments, state governments, national governments. This is a big socioeconomic concern in our world right now. And so this is a really great strategy that you can leverage, is to promote telecommuting in lieu of workers commuting to a centralized location every day. This reduces wear and tear on the roads and infrastructures, reduces traffic accidents, but also environmental sustainability. It's cutting down on carbon emissions immensely. Remote workers are much more likely to use human-powered transportation than urban commuters, and because they commute to wherever they want to commute, and usually that's a very local place, and so they are walking, they're biking, they're running more, etc. So we're seeing healthier lifestyles, drastically reduced carbon emissions just due to commuting alone, and then that also has an impact on the transportation and mobility infrastructure in an area. So again, like, these are separate concerns, but they all are so closely unified when we're talking about remote work as a strategy.
And I'm thinking also this goes back, it links a little bit to natural disasters, what's going on in our context. Also, it allows for people to be more mobile and move away from the areas which are starting either to become dangerous as the weather changes, because we're seeing that, and just giving that much more of mobility.
Yeah. And even, I mean, worst case scenario, even if a remote worker is driving just as much as they would in an urban area, at least we are distributing the carbon emissions as much as we're distributing the people, right? Like, yes, it's true that the research is telling us that they're driving less and using less electricity, et cetera, using less physical waste than they would in an office. But even if none of that were to change and they were to move to a rural area and produce just as much waste and emissions as they were before, at least we're distributing it, right? And so this really relieves the infrastructures in urban areas. And so our planet has more of an opportunity to take care of itself, as opposed to really just destroying these urban areas in such a saturated, aggressive way. But the good news is that they don't. When you send a remote worker offsite, they use considerably less equipment and electricity, and they're producing almost zero physical waste that's related to their career. Like it's a win-win-win-win-win.
Excellent. And I've left this one to the end because I think it's the most interesting one, and one which I haven't heard of, but I can see. Yeah, I can see. Remote work diversifies politics. Explain.
Isn't that fascinating? Oh, this is one of my favorite topics because, yeah, it's one that I never saw coming. I never thought about it until it was explained to me by a political science expert. And this is another result of the migration of people. That again, when you get to live wherever you want to live, then you are using non-traditional criteria in order to make that selection. And again, remote workers are a bit more independent and isolated than other workers. So we don't have this really strong dependency on our urban or even environmental culture like we used to. We're not seeing as strong of a dependency on finding an area to live in which everybody around you is exactly the same. You are choosing an area to live based on things like the natural recreation amenities that are around you, and accessibility to friends and family, or accessibility to an airport, or things like that. So we see that cultures are much more diversified when the workers or when the residents are able to choose where they live. And as such, we see a more diverse range of opinions, both personally and politically. So yes, when remote workers are given the opportunity to migrate and live in more flexible areas, more rural areas, more broad landscapes, or whatever, when remote workers are given the opportunity to live where they want to live, then those areas become much more diverse in their opinions, and as a result, the opinions that are then shared and submitted in elections and in the political representatives of an area are much more likely to be diverse as well.
Wow.
I know, it's just fascinating. It blows my mind too. It's amazing.
It's really interesting because as much as we're always thinking about, okay, technology can humanify us, that's the wrong word, but humanize us.
Yeah.
But I forget sometimes that, of course, this mobility also means that there is cross-pollination of ideas, that we bring ourselves into a different environment. So we expose ourselves to people who are different, but we also bring something different with us. So mobility also, of course, can support the more mixing of ideas, opinions, etc.
Mm-hmm. And leadership opportunities as well. If I lived in an urban area, there's no way that I would consider being a political representative, because I mean, there's so many other people that would around me that are so much more qualified. I would feel like I would need to have political science as a career in order to justify that decision. However, when we distribute people and our remote workers are able to live in more rural areas and smaller communities, all of a sudden they have a voice that matters. And because they are very up to date in modern technology, and we have this great diversity of opinions that we just talked about, all of a sudden great leadership opportunities open up for remote workers in their local areas, and they have more opportunities to not only be a great voice and an engaged worker in their companies, but also in their communities. And so we see great leadership in school boards and in city councils, and even in just arts councils, hobby-based councils like that. Remote workers have this work-life balance that they can have more time and voice in their local communities to contribute.
That's something that I've talked about before, the first time I started to think about this was with Chris Slemp, and we were thinking about how much more time you can invest in your local community. What I never thought of is of how what the mobility is doing is helping you to find the community where you can thrive. Also, because we're not always born in the community where we can thrive. Our work is not always in the community where we can thrive. But when we have that freedom, we can find the places where we really want to make a difference. So again, it's a very interesting point, the fact about the leadership opportunities and also the real engagement with everyone around you and the desire to make things better around you.
Exactly. Yes, it's amazing.
Yeah. Good. Well, Laura, we could, it's great. It is great because this is such high level thinking. And for me, I can only but go there for now, and then I'll go into my more mundane stuff. I think this is a very important piece of advocacy because, again, like you said at the beginning, it takes us away from, okay, yes, this is comfortable, this can make our lives easier, to actually this has real potential to transform a lot of stuff that could do with transforming.
Exactly.
And, is there anything else that is on your mind that we haven't explored?
I think it's a great challenge for each of us to think about our remote work models and our flexibility arrangements in a much more grateful way, because that will help inspire us to share them. When we think of them in a deeper way and we think, that's great that you can sleep in till 7:55 and still be on time to your 8 o'clock meeting. Like, that's great. But what impact does that have? How can that be used to inspire or benefit others as well? How can we use this to change the problems that we see in the world? And I'll tell you, you will be absolutely fascinated when we allow ourselves to start thinking more deeply and humanizing remote work in that way. It's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, there's things like we see lower childhood obesity rates because parents are able to be home more. We have more time to cook healthy dinners on a regular basis. We have more time to get outside and exercise as a family. I mean, who would have ever thought that just being able to work remotely would affect future generations like that? It's absolutely humbling and inspiring to participate in this work. So yeah, I encourage all of us to think more deeply and more seriously about remote work. Yes, it's convenient, but it's a cause for global change.
So you can find out more about Laurel over at distributeconsulting.com and laurelfarrell.com. That's LaurelFarrel.com. And you can hear her talk about information isolation in episode 189, where we talked about loneliness and the remote worker. Well, that's it, listeners. Yay! Congratulations if you got to the end. I hope you found it, a little bit thought-provoking. If nothing else, that we kept you company, that you found interesting what people are doing and the different reasons why people are advocating so loudly for remote work. Do check out the show notes on our website, episode 212, because my colleague Maya Middlemiss will have prepared a beautiful blog post. Let's face it, these show notes are also now blog posts with photos from our guests, summaries of what we've covered, and the links we have mentioned. Do get in touch with feedback, and also what could we cover in the future? Somebody sent a question through after listening to the podcast on the journey of the remote leader, and Maya and I will be answering that in the next episode. So any questions, maybe other people have the same. Let's do a bit of working out loud here. But if you've got suggestions for topics, however big or small, send them through. Stay in touch via email if you want. You can sign up to our newsletter that will go into your inbox, or email me Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com. I'm getting excited that we're at the end. Or do the Twitter thing. I'm at Pilar Orti. Don't forget to subscribe to the show in your podcast app and let me know if you don't know how to do that. I'll be happy to walk you through it. Thank you for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.